All right, kids. I'm going to read to you chapter 5 and 6. Hey, guys. Oh, yeah, that's my old pal, Sir Russell Fox. He's going to hang out and maybe make some comments along the way or ask questions that I think you might ask if I was in class with you. Yeah, I'll help out. Yeah, we'll see about that. Okay, so this is chapter 5 and 6. And I just lost my place, believe it or not, before we even get started. Okay, just give me a second here. Yep, this is the end of chapter 4. So here we are. Bullhead City. The dominant primordial beast was strong in Buck, and under the fierce conditions of trail life, it grew and grew, yet it was secret growth. His newborn cunning gave him poise and control. Jack London, The Call of the Wild. And if you recall, that was Jack London was his favorite writer. We talked about The Call of the Wild. All hail the dominant primordial beast and Captain Ahab too. Alexander Supertramp, May 1992, graffito found inside the abandoned bus. So he was actually quoting from that book, which he took with him. When his camera was ruined, McCandless stopped taking photographs. He also stopped keeping a journal, a practice he didn't resume until he went to Alaska the next year. Not a great deal is known, therefore, about where he traveled after departing Las Vegas in May 1991. From a letter McCandless sent to Jan Burris, we know he spent July and August on the Oregon coast, probably in the vicinity of Astoria, where he complained that, quote, the fog and rain was often intolerable. In September, he hitched down U.S. Highway 101 into California, then headed east into the desert again, and by early October he had landed in Bullhead City, Arizona. Jump down a paragraph. On the face of it, Bullhead City doesn't seem like the kind of place that would appeal to an adherent of Thoreau or Tolstoy, an ideologue who expressed nothing but contempt for the uh, for the our for the bourgeoisie trappings of Main Street America. McCandless, nevertheless, took a strong liking to Bullhead. Maybe it was his affinity for the lumpen who were well represented in the community's trailer parks and campgrounds and laundromats. Perhaps he simply fell in love with the stark desert landscape that encircles the town. In any case, when he arrived in Bullhead City, McCandless stopped moving for more than 2 months, probably the longest he stayed in one place from the time he left Atlanta until he went to Alaska and moved into the abandoned bus on the Stampede Trail. In a card he mailed to Westerberg in October, he says of Bullhead, it's a good place to spend the winter, and I might finally settle down and abandon my tramping life for good. I'll see what happens when spring comes again, because that's when I tend to get my really itchy feet. At the time he wrote these words, he was holding down a full-time job flipping quarter pounders at the McDonald's on Main Drag, commuting to work on a bicycle. Outwardly, he was living a surprisingly conventional existence, even going so far as to open up a savings account at a local bank. That's a lot different than he's been. Yeah, it is. It really is. It says Bullhead City, huh? Okay. Curiously, when McCandless applied for the McDonald's job, he presented himself as Chris McCandless, not as Alex, and gave his employees his real Social Security number. It was an uncharacteristic break from his cover that might easily have alerted his parents to his whereabouts, although the lapse proved to be of no consequence because the private investigator hired by Walt and Billy never caught the slip. 2 years after he sweated over the grill at Bullhead, his colleagues at the Golden Arches don't recall much about Chris McCandless. One thing I do remember is that he had a thing about socks, said the assistant manager, a fleshy, garrulous man named George Dresden. He always wore shoes without socks, just plain couldn't stand to wear socks. But McDonald's has a rule that employees have to wear appropriate footwear at all times. That means shoes and socks. Chris would comply with the rules. Just as soon as the shift was over, bang, the first thing he did is peel off the socks. I mean, the very first thing, kind of like a statement, so to let us know we didn't own him, I guess. But he was a nice kid and a good worker, real dependable. Didn't Miss Kiernan work at McDonald's? Yeah, I think she did. Huh. Okay. Um, Lori Zarza, the assistant manager, has a somewhat different impression of McCandless. Frankly, I was surprised he ever got hired. She said he could do the job. He cooked in the back, but he always worked at the same slow pace, even during the lunch rush. No matter how much you get him to hurry it up, customers would be stacked 10 deep at the counter, and he wouldn't understand why I was on his case. He just didn't make the connection. It was like he was off in his own universe. He was reliable, though, a body that showed up every day, so they didn't dare fire him. They only paid $4.25 an hour, and with all the casinos right across the river starting people at $6.25, well, it was hard to keep bodies behind the counter. I don't think he ever hung out with any of the employees after work or anything. When he talked, it was always about trees or nature and weird stuff like that. We all thought he was missing a few screws. When Chris finally quit, Zara admits it was probably because of me. When he first started working, he was homeless, and he'd show up to work smelling bad. It wasn't up to McDonald's standards to come in smelling the way he did. So finally, they designated me to tell him that he needed to take a bath more often. Ever since I told him, there was a clash between us. And then the other employees, they were just trying to be nice. They started asking him if he needed some soap or anything. That made him mad, you could tell. But he never showed it outright. About 3 weeks later, he just walked out the door and quit. McCandless had tried to disguise the fact that he was a drifter living out of a backpack. He told his fellow employees that he lived across the river in Laughlin. Whenever they offered him a ride home after work, he made excuses and politely declined. In fact, during the first few weeks in Bullhead, McCandless camped out in the desert at the edge of town. Then he started squatting in a vacant mobile home. The latter arrangement, he explained in a letter to Jan Burris, came about his way. One morning, I was shaving in a restroom when an old man came in and, observing me, asked if I was sleeping out. I told him yes, and it turned out that he had this old trailer I could stay in for free. The only problem is that he doesn't really own it. Some absentee owners are merely letting him live there, land here, in another little trailer he stays in. So I kind of have to keep things toned down and stay out of sight, because he isn't supposed to have anybody over here. It's really quite a good deal, though. For the inside of a trailer, it's nice. It's a house trailer furnished with some electric sockets working and a lot of living space. The only drawback is that this guy, whose name is Charlie, is something of a lunatic, and it's rather difficult to get along with him sometimes. Charlie still lives in the same address in a small teardrop-shaped camping trailer sheathed in rust-pocked tin, without plumbing or electricity, tucked behind a much larger blue and white mobile home where McCandless slept. Denuded mountains are visible to the west, towering sternly above the rooftops of adjacent double-wides. A baby blue Ford Torino rests on blocks in the unkempt yard, weed sprouting from its engine compartment. The ammonia reek of human urine rises from the nearby Olander Hedge. Ew. Yeah. Chris, Charlie barks, scanning porous memory banks. Oh, yeah, him. Yeah, I remember him, sure. Charlie, dressed in a sweatshirt and khaki work pants, is a frail, nervous man with rheumy eyes and a growth of white stubble across his chin. By his recollection, McCandless stayed in the trailer park a month. Nice guy, yeah, pretty nice guy, Charlie reports. Didn't like to be around too many people, though. Temperamental. He meant good, but I think he had a lot of complexes. You know what I mean? What I'm saying? Like to read books by that Alaska guy, Jack London. Never said much. He'd get moody. Wouldn't like to be bothered. Seemed like a kid who was looking for something, just didn't know what it was. I was like that once, but then I realized that I was looking for money. Ha ha ha! Ooh boy. But like I was saying, Alaska, yeah, he talked about getting to Alaska, maybe to find whatever it was he was looking for. Nice guy, seemed like one anyway. Had a lot of complexes sometimes. Had him bad. When he left, it was around Christmas, I think. Gave me $50 and a pack of cigarettes for letting him stay there. Thought that was mighty decent of him. In late November, McCandless sent a postcard to Jan Burris in care of a post office box in Nyland, a small town in California's Imperial Valley. That card we got in Nyland was the first letter from him in a long time with a return address, Burris remembers. So I immediately wrote back and said we'd come to see him next weekend in Bullhead, which wasn't that far from where he was. McCandless was thrilled to hear from Jan. "I am so glad to find you both alive and sound," he exclaimed in a letter dated December 9, 1991. "Thanks so much for the Christmas card. It's nice to be thought of this time of year. I'm so excited to hear that you will be coming to see me. You're welcome anytime. It's really great to think after almost a year and a half we shall meet again." He closed the letter by drawing a map and giving detailed directions to finding the trailer on Bullhead City's Baseline Road. I'm going to jump down that long paragraph. When McCandless arrived at the Slabs, a huge flea market swap meet was in full swing out in the desert. Burris, as one of the vendors, had set up some folding tables displaying cheap, mostly second-hand goods for sale, and McCandless volunteered to oversee her large inventory of used paperback books. "I know the Slabs." "You do?" "Yeah, I used to live out in the desert there." "Well, why don't you tell the kids about it?" "Well, it's like a large parking lot, and people would set up their flea markets, and they would sell their various wares out of their cars and their trailers and their camps." "Huh, that's pretty interesting. So was it pretty nice out there?" "I mean, the folks were okay. I ate some garbage. I also got rabies." "Ew." "Yeah." He helped a lot, Burris acknowledges. "He watched the table when I needed to leave, categorized all the books, made a lot of sales. He seemed to get a real kick out of it. Alex was big on classics. Dickens, H.G. Wells, Mark Twain, Jack London. Why don't you help turn the pages? London was his favorite. He'd try to convince every snowbird who walked by that they should read Call of the Wild. You know what a snowbird is? No, actually I don't. It's people who live in the north and then they want to get away from the cold, so they take their campers and they go out west in the winter. Huh. Okay. McCandless had been infatuated with London ever since childhood. London's fervent condemnations of capitalist society, his glorification of the primordial world, his champion of the great unwashed, all of it mirrored McCandless's passions. Mesmerized by London's portrayal of life in Alaska and Yukon, McCandless read and reread Call of the Wild, White Fang, To Build a Fire, An Odyssey of the North, The Wit of Porpatuck. He was so enthralled by these tales, however, that he seemed to forget that they were works of fiction, constructions of the imagination that had more to do with London's romantic sensibilities than with the actualities of life in the subarctic wilderness. McCandless conveniently overlooked the fact that London himself had spent just a single winter in the North, and that he died by his own hand on his California estate at the age of 40, a fatuous drunk, obese and pathetic, maintaining a sedentary existence that bore scant resemblance to the ideals he espoused in print. Among the residents of the Nyland Slabs was a 17-year-old named Tracy, and she fell in love with McCandless during their week-long visit. "She was a sweet little thing," said Burris, "the daughter of a couple of tramps who parked their rig 4 vehicles down from us." And poor Tracy developed a hopeless crush on Alex. The whole time he was in Nyland, she hung around making goo-goo eyes at him, bugging me to convince him to go on walks with her. Alex was nice to her, but she was too young for him. He couldn't take her seriously. Probably left her brokenhearted for a whole week or more. Even though McCandless rebuffed Tracy's advances, Burris makes it clear that he was no recluse. He had a good time when he was around people, a real good time. At the swap meet, he'd talk to people. Anybody walked by, He must have met 6 or 7 dozen people in Nyland, and he was friendly to every one of them. He needed his solitude at times, but he wasn't a hermit. He did a lot of socializing. Sometimes I think it was like he was storing up company for the times he knew nobody would be around. McCandless was especially attentive to Burris, flirting and clowning with her in every opportunity. He liked to tease me and torment me, she recalls. I'd go out back to hang clothes on the line around the trailer, and he'd attach clothespins all over me. He was playful like a little kid. I had puppies, and he was always putting them under laundry baskets to watch them bounce around and yelp. He'd do it till I got mad and have to yell at him to stop. But in truth, he was real good with the dogs. That's important. Yeah, it is. They'd follow him around, cry after him, want to sleep with them. Alex had a way with animals. One afternoon, while McCandless was tending the book table at the Nyland swap meet, somebody left a portable electric organ with Burris to sell on consignment. Alex took it over and entertained everybody all day playing, she said. He had an amazing voice. He drew quite a crowd. Until then, I never knew he was musical. McCandless spoke frequently of the denizens of the slabs about his plans for Alaska. He did calisthenics each morning to get in shape for the rigors of the bush, and discussed backcountry survival strategies at length with Bob, a self-styled survivalist. Me, said Burris, I thought Alex had lost his mind when he told me about his great Alaska adventure, as he called it, but Odyssey. But he was really excited about it. Couldn't stop talking about the trip. Despite prodding from Burris, however, McCandless revealed virtually nothing about his family. I'd ask him, Burris says, have you let your people know what you're up to? Does your mom know you're going to Alaska? Does your dad know? But he'd never answer. He'd just roll his eyes at me, get peeved, tell me to quit trying to mother him. And Bob would say, leave him alone. He's a grown man. I'd keep at it until he changed the subject, though, because of what happened between me and my own son. He's out there somewhere, and I'd want someone to look after him like I tried to look after Alex. The Sunday before McCandless left Nyland, he was watching an NFL playoff game on the television in Burris' trailer when she noticed that he was rooting especially hard for the Washington Redskins. So I asked him if he was from D.C. area, she said, and he answered, yeah, actually I am. That's the only thing he ever let on about his background. The following Wednesday, McCandless announced it was time for him to be moving on. He said he needed to go to the post office in Salton City, 50 miles west of Nyland, to which he'd asked the manager of the Bullhead McDonald's to send his final paycheck. General delivery. He accepted Burris's offer to drive him there, but when she tried to give him a little money for helping out at the swap meet, she recalls, he acted real offended. I told him, man, you got to have money if you get along in this world, but he wouldn't take it. Finally, I got him to take some Swiss Army knives and a few belt knives. I convinced them they'd come in handy in Alaska, that he could maybe trade them for something down the road. After an extended argument, Burris also got McCandless to accept some long underwear and other warm clothing she thought he'd need in Alaska. He eventually took it to shut me up, she laughs, but the day after he left, I found most of it in the van. He pulled it out of his pack when we weren't looking and hid it underneath the seat. Alex was a great kid, but he could really make me mad sometimes. Although Burris was concerned about McCandless, she assumed he'd come through in one piece. I thought he'd be fine in the end, she reflects. He was smart. He'd figure out how to paddle a canoe down to Mexico, how to hop freight trains, how to score a bed at inner city missions. He figured all of that out on his own, and I felt he'd figure out Alaska too. That's the end of chapter 5. This is chapter 6 now. Anza Borigo. No man ever followed his genius till it misled him. Though the result were bodily weakness, yet perhaps no one can say that the consequences to be regretted, for these were a life in a conformity to higher principles. If the day and the night are such that you greet them with joy, and life emits a fragrance like flowers and sweet-scented herbs, is more elastic, more starry, more immortal, that is your success. All nature is your congratulation, and you have cause momentarily to bless yourself. The greatest gains and values are farther from being appreciated. We easily come to doubt if they exist. We soon forget them. They are the highest reality. The true harvest of my daily life is somewhat as intangible and indescribable as the tints of morning or evening. It's a little stardust caught, a segment of the rainbow which I have clutched. That's from Henry David Thoreau in Walden. On January 4th, this writer received an unusual letter. Now, this is the author of the book we're reading, penned in a shaky, anachronistic script that suggested an elderly author. To whom it may concern, the letter began. Fix my camera a little bit. A little better. I would like to get a copy of the magazine that carried the story of the young man, Alex McCandless, dying in Alaska. I would like to write the one that investigated the incident. I drove him from Salton City, California in March 1992 to Grand Junction, Colorado. I left Alex there to hitchhike to South Dakota. He said he would keep me in touch. The last I heard from him was a letter the first week of April 1992. On our trip, we took pictures, me with a camcorder and Alex with his camera. If you have a copy of that magazine, please send me the cost of that magazine. I understand he was hurt. If so, I would like to know how he was injured, for he always carried enough rice in his backpack. He had Arctic clothes and plenty of money. Sincerely, Roland Franz. Please do not make these facts available to anybody till I know more about his death, for he was not just a common wayfarer. Please believe me. The magazine that Franz requested was the January 1993 issue of Outside, something that Mr. Breslin reads, which featured a cover story about the death of Chris McCandless. His letter had been addressed to the offices of Outside in Chicago because I had written the McCandless piece, and it was forwarded to me. McCandless made an indelible impression on a number of people during the course of his hijinks, most of whom spent only a few days in his company, a week or two at most. Nobody, however, was affected more powerfully by his or her brief contact with the boy than Ronald Franz, who was 80 years old when their paths intersected in January 1992. I'm going to skip a couple paragraphs and get to the bottom of page 49. When he needed provisions, he would hitch or walk to the 4 miles into town where he bought rice and filled his plastic water jug at the Market Liquor Store Post Office, a beige stucco building that serves as the cultural nexus of Greater Salton City. One Thursday in mid-January, McCandless was hitching back out of the Baja after filling his jug when an old man named Ron Franz stopped to give him a ride. "Where's your camp?" Franz inquired. "Out past, oh my God, Hot Springs," McCandless replied. "I've lived in these parts for 6 years now. I've never heard of any place that goes by that name. Show me how you get there." Skip one paragraph down. McCandless, however, wasn't living right at the springs. He was camped by himself about another half a mile out of the Bajada. Franz drove Alex the rest of the way, chatting with him for a while, and then returned to town where he lived alone, rent-free, in return for managing a ramshackle apartment building. Franz, a devout Christian, had spent most of his adult life in the Army, stationed in Shanghai and Okinawa. On New Year's Eve, 1957, while he was overseas, his wife and only child were killed by a drunk driver in an automobile accident. Franz's son had been due to graduate from medical school the following June. Franz started hitting the whiskey hard. 6 months later, he managed to pull himself together and quit drinking cold turkey, but he never really got over the loss. To salve his loneliness in the years after the accident, he started unofficially adopting indigent Okinawan boys and girls, eventually taking 14 of them under his wing, paying for the oldest to attend medical school in Philadelphia and another to study medicine in Japan. When Franz met McCandless, his long dormant paternal impulses were kindled anew. He couldn't get the young man out of his mind. The boy had said his name was Alex. He declined to give a surname, and that he came from West Virginia. He was polite, friendly, well-groomed. He seemed extremely intelligent, Franz states in an exotic broke that sounds like a blend of Scottish, Pennsylvania Dutch, and California Carolina drawl. I thought he was a nice kid to be living by that hot springs with those nudists and drunks and dope smokers. After attending church that Sunday, Franz decided to talk to Alex about how he was living. Somebody needed to convince him to get an education and a job and make something of his life. When he returned to McCandless's camp and launched into his self-improvement pitch, though, McCandless cut him off abruptly. "Look, Mr. Franz," he declared, "you don't need to worry about me. I have a college education. I'm not destitute. I'm living like this by choice." Why did they think he's not educated? Well, because he's a guy who barely has a couple dollars to his name, and he's working jobs that anybody could work, and yet he has a degree. Most homeless people aren't that situation. Yeah, he was kind of unique that way. Yeah, I would say so. Now you made me lose my place. Yeah. I lived this way by choice. And then, despite his initial prickliness, the young man warmed to the old-timer, and the two engaged in long conversation. Before the day was out, they had driven into Palm Springs in Franz's truck, had a meal at a nice restaurant, and taken a ride on the tramway to the top of San Jacinto Peak, at the bottom which McCandless stopped to unearth a Mexican syrup and some other possessions he buried for safekeeping a year earlier. Skip that paragraph. An accomplished leather worker, Franz taught Alex the secrets of his craft. For his first project, McCandless produced a tooled leather belt on which he created an artful pictorial record of his wanderings. Alex is inscribed at the belt's left end, then the initials CJM for Christopher Johnson McCandless. Frame, a skull, and crossbones. Across the strip of cowhide, one sees a rendering of two-lane blacktop and no U-turn sign. A thunderstorm producing a flash flood that engulfs a car, a hitchhiker's thumb, an eagle, the Sierra Nevada, salmon cavorting in the Pacific Ocean and the Pacific Coast Highway from Oregon to Washington, the Rocky Mountains, Montana wheat fields, the South Dakota rattlesnake, Westerberg's house in Carthage, the Colorado River, a gale in the Gulf of California, a canoe beached beside a tent, Las Vegas, the initials TCD, Morro Bay, Astoria at the buckle end, finally the letter N, presumably representing North, executed with a remarkable skill and creativity. This belt is as astonishing as any artifact Chris McCandless left behind. All that on one belt? Yeah, isn't that something? All those pictures? Yeah, apparently. God, how fat was this kid? You'd have to use your belt. Shut up. You're no help at all. Sorry. All right. Jumping down a paragraph there. One day in early February, McCandless announced that he was splitting for San Diego to earn money for his Alaska trip. "You don't need to go to San Diego," Franz protested. "I'll give you money if you need some." "No, you don't get it. I'm going to San Diego. I'm leaving on Monday." "Okay, I'll drive you there." "Don't be ridiculous," McCandless scoffed. "I need to go anyway," Franz lied, "to pick up some leather supplies." McCandless relented. He struck his camp, stored most of his belongings in Franz's apartment. The boy didn't want to schlep his sleeping bag or backpack around the city, and then rode with the old man across the mountains to the coast. It was raining when Franz dropped McCandless at the San Diego waterfront. It was a very hard thing for me to do, Franz said. I was sad to be leaving him. On February 19th, McCandless called Franz Collect to wish him a happy 81st birthday. McCandless remembered the date because his own birthday had been 7 days earlier. He had turned 24 on February 12th. During the phone call, he also confessed to Franz that he was having trouble finding work. On February 28th, he mailed a postcard to Jan Burris. Hello, it reads. Have been living on streets in San Diego for the past week. First day I got here, it rained like hell. The missions here suck, and I'm getting preached to death. Not much happening in terms of jobs, and I'm heading north tomorrow. I've decided to head for Alaska no later than May 1st. But I've got to raise a little cash to outfit myself. May go back to work for a friend I have in South Dakota if he can use me. Don't know where I'm headed now, but I'll write when I get there. Hope all's well with you. Take care, Alex. On March 5th, McCandless sent another card to Burris and a card to Franz as well. The missive to Burris says, Greetings from Seattle. I'm a hobo now. That's right, I'm riding the rails now. What fun. I wish I had jumped trains earlier. The rails have some drawbacks, however. First, that one becomes absolutely filthy. Second is that one must tangle with these crazy bulls. I was sitting in a hot shot in L.A. when a bull found me with his flashlight about 10 p.m. Get out of there before I kill you, screamed the bull. So these are people for security. I got out and saw he had drawn his revolver. He interrogated me at gunpoint, then growled, If I ever see you again this train, again, I'll kill you. Hit the road. What a lunatic. I got the last laugh when I caught the same train 5 minutes later and rode it all the way to Oakland. I'll be in touch. Alex. A week later, Franz's phone rang. It was the operator, he says, asking if I would accept a collect call from someone named Alex. When I heard his voice, it was like sunshine after a month of rain. Will you come pick me up, McCandless asked. Yes. Where in Seattle are you? Ron, McCandless laughed. I'm not in Seattle. I'm in California, just up the road from you, here in Coachella. Unable to find work in the rainy Northwest, McCandless had hopped a series of freight trains back to the desert. In Colton, California, he was discovered by another bull and thrown in jail. Upon his release, he had hitchhiked to Coachella, just southeast of Palm Springs, and called Franz. As soon as he hung up the phone, Franz rushed out to pick up McCandless. We went to a Sizzler where I filled him up with steak and lobster, Franz recalls, and then we drove back to Salton City. Before departing, I'm jumping down a paragraph. Before departing, Franz gave McCandless a machete, an Arctic parka, collapsible fishing pole, and some other gear for his Alaska undertaking. Thursday at daybreak, they drove out of Salton City in Franz's truck. In Bullhead City, they stopped to close out McCandless's bank account and to visit Charlie's trailer, where McCandless had stashed some books and other belongings, including the journal photo album from his canoe trip down to Colorado. McCandless had insisted on buying Franz lunch at the Golden Nugget Casino across the river at Laughlin. Recognizing McCandless, a waitress at the Nugget gushed, Alex, you're back. Franz had purchased a video camera before the trip, and he paused now and then along the way to record the sights. Although McCandless usually ducked away whenever Franz pointed the lens in his direction, some brief footage exists of him standing impatiently in the snow above Bryce Canyon. Okay, let's go, he protested in the camcorder after a few moments. There's a lot more ahead, Ron. Wearing jeans and a wool sweater, McCandless looks tan, strong, and healthy. Franz reports that it was a pleasant, if hurried, trip. Sometimes we drive for hours without saying a word, he recalls. Even when he was sleeping, I was happy just knowing he was there. At one point, Franz dared to make a special request of McCandless. My mother was an only child, he explains. So was my father, and I was their only child. Now that my own boy's dead, I'm the end of the line. When I'm gone, my family will be finished, gone forever. So I asked Alex if I could adopt him, if he'd be my grandson. Skip a paragraph. Painlessly, that is, from McCandless's perspective, although not for the old man's. One can only speculate about why Franz became so attached to McCandless so quickly, but the affection he felt was genuine, intense, and unalloyed. Franz had been living a solitary existence for many years. He had no family and few friends. A disciplined, self-reliant man, he got along remarkably well, despite his age and solitude. When McCandless came into his world, however, the boy undermined the old man's meticulously constructed defenses. Franz relished being with McCandless, but their burgeoning friendship was also reminded him how lonely he had been. The boy unmasked the gaping void in Franz's life, even as he helped fill it. When McCandless departed as suddenly as he had arrived, Franz found himself deeply and unexpectedly hurt. In early April, a long letter arrived in Franz's post office box bearing a South Dakota postmark. Hello, Ron. Alex here. I've been working up here in Carthage, South Dakota for nearly 2 weeks now. I arrived up here 3 days after we parted in Grand Junction, Colorado. I hope that you made it back to Salton City without too many problems. I enjoy working here and things are going well. The weather is not very bad and many days are surprisingly mild. Some of the farmers are even already going out into their fields. It must be getting rather hot down there in Southern California by now. I wonder if you ever get a chance to get out and see how many people showed for the March 20 rainbow gathering there at the hot springs. Sounds like it might have been a lot of fun, but I don't think you really understand these kind of people very well. I will not be here in South Dakota very much longer. My friend Wayne wants me to stay working at the grain elevator through May and then go combining with him the entire summer. But I have my soul set entirely on my Alaska odyssey and hope to be on my way no later than April 15th. That means I will be leaving here before very long, so I need you to send me any mail I may have received and the return address listed below. Ron, I really enjoy all the help you have given me and the times that we spent together. I hope that you will not be too depressed about our parting. It may be a very long time before we see each other again, but providing that I get through the Alaskan deal in one piece, you will be hearing from me again in the future. I'd like to repeat the advice I gave you before, in that I think you really should make a radical change in your lifestyle and begin to boldly do things which you may previously never have thought of doing or been too hesitant to attempt. So many people live unhappy circumstances and yet will not take the initiative to change their situation because they're conditioned to a life of security, conformity, and conservatism, all of which may appear to give one peace of mind, but in reality nothing is more damaging to the adventurous spirit within a man than a secure future. The very basic core of a man's living spirit is his passion for adventure. The joy of life comes from our encounters with new experiences, and hence there is no greater joy than to have an endlessly changing horizon, for each day to have a new and different sun. If you want to get more out of life, Ron, you must lose your inclination for monotonous security and adopt a helter-skelter style of life that will at first appear to you to be crazy. But once you become accustomed to such a life, you'll see its full measure and its incredible beauty. And so, Ron, in short, get out of Salton City and hit the road. I guarantee you will be very glad you did. But I fear that you will ignore my advice. You think that I am stubborn, but you're even more stubborn than me. You had a wonderful chance on your drive back to see one of the greatest sights on earth, the Grand Canyon, something every American should see at least once in their life. But for some reason incomprehensible to me, you wanted nothing but to bolt for home as quickly as possible. Right back to the same situation which you see day after day after day after day. I fear you will follow this same inclination in the future and thus fail to discover all the wonderful things that God has placed around us to discover. Don't settle down and sit in one place. Move around. Be nomadic. Make each day a new horizon. You are still going to live a long time, Ron, and it would be a shame if you did not take the opportunity to revolutionize your life and move into an entirely new realm and experience. You're wrong if you think joy emanates only or principally from human relationships. God has placed it all around us. It is in everything and anything we might experience. We just have to have the courage to turn against our habitual lifestyles and engage in unconventional living. My point is that you do not need me or anyone else around to bring this kind of light in your life. It is simply waiting there for you to grasp it, and all you have to do is reach for it. The only person you are fighting is yourself and your stubbornness to engage in new circumstances. Ron, I really hope as soon as you can, you will get out in Salton City and put a little camper on the back of your pickup and start seeing some of the great work that God has done here in the American West. You will see things and meet people, and there is much to learn from them. And you must do it in economy style, no motels. Do your own cooking as a general rule. Spend as little as possible and you will enjoy it as much more immensely. I hope that the next time I see you, you will be a new man with a vast array of new adventures and experiences behind you. Don't hesitate or allow yourself to make excuses. Just get out and do it. Just get out and do it. You will be very, very glad that you did. Take care, Ron. Alex. This has a lot to do with his philosophy, doesn't it? Yeah, I think it kind of does. Mr. Breslin, we're kind of running out of time. Yeah, this is 41 minutes, so we better go. Bye, kids.